Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a fear that, well, you might not even consciously think about much, but it has some surprisingly real-world consequences.
That's
The
right.
fear of the number 13, or Triskaidekaphobia.
Mhm.
You shared some great sources, and our mission today is really to dig into this. Where does this superstition even come from? How does it show up? And what makes this one number so well feared?
It's a fascinating area. And yeah, Triskaidekaphobia, it's pretty straightforward from the Greek roots. Triskaideka meaning 13 and phobos, well, that means fear.
Simple enough.
And it even has a couple of, let's say, close relatives. Paraskavidekatriophobia,
Whoa, say that again.
huh? Paraskavidekatriophobia and Frigatriskaidekaphobia. They're both just different ways of saying the fear of Friday the 13th.
Okay, got it. Friday the 13th fear. Makes sense.
What's interesting, though, is the first time we actually see the term triskaidekaphobia written down wasn't until 1910. It was in Isidore Coriat's book, Abnormal Psychology.
1910. That feels, I don't know, quite recent for such a widespread feeling, right?
Mhm.
It makes you wonder why this idea of 13 being unlucky feels so much older.
It does.
Most of us kind of get the sense it's bad luck, but yeah, we want to go deeper than just that general vibe.
Mhm.
Let's unpack the evidence, see what really fuels this belief. So where do these stories even begin?
That really is the big question. I mean, you hear claims it's ancient, but the documented trail, it really seems to pick up in Europe after the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Take the tarot, for instance. Tarot cards started appearing around 1450, and in several, variations of the tarot deck, the death card is number 13.
The death card. Yeah, you can see how that visual association might stick.
Exactly. It's like this symbolic system starts to codify a negative feeling about the number over time.
Did people back then actually, like, explicitly talk about that connection?
They did. By 1781, you have Antoine Courtegebalin writing about the tarot, and he specifically says the number 13 was always considered as unlucky.
Always considered unlucky. Wow.
And just a few years after that, 1784, Johann Gottlob Emanuel Breitkopf reinforces it. He directly links the tarot's number 13 to death and misfortune. It makes you think how much these early symbols shaped later beliefs.
Right, so the tarot seems to have cemented that negative image. What about the other big one, the superstition about 13 people at a table?
Yeah, that's another really common one. And that belief, it's been around since at least 1774. The idea being, if 13 people dine together, one of them won't live out the year.
Grim.
It is. And what's intriguing is how these kinds of social superstitions just take hold and spread, often without a super clear origin point.
Exactly, you just hear it, and it becomes part of the background noise. Have anyone tried to explain why that might be unlucky back then?
Yes, actually. Around that same time, 1774 again, Johann August Ephraim Goetze speculated it might link back to the Last Supper.
Ah, the Last Supper.
Right. Jesus dining with the 12 disciples. That makes 13 people present at, well, a pretty pivotal and ultimately tragic meal.
Yeah, that does make a certain kind of intuitive sense. A hugely significant event, 13 people, ends in betrayal and death. That's a powerful narrative.
It is. And later on, especially from the 1890s in English-speaking places, the story shifted a bit. People started specifically saying Judas was the 13th person to sit down, the betrayer.
So pinning it on Judas specifically.
But it's important to remember the Bible itself. It doesn't actually detail the seating order. It confirms 13 individuals were there, yes, but not who sat where or when.
Interesting. So it shows how a story can kind of evolve and get more specific, even if the original text isn't that detailed.
Definitely. A sort of cultural remix, you could say.
Okay, so biblical interpretations playing a role. Now, I've also heard about a Norse myth connected to Unlucky 13, something about gods and an unwanted guest.
Yes, that story. It usually goes something like this. 12 gods are having a feast in Valhalla, and then the uninvited 13th guest, Loki, crashes the party.
Loki, the trickster, always causing trouble.
Exactly. And in this version, Loki's arrival leads directly to the death of Balder, the god of light. This telling got a boost from Douglas Hill's work in 1968, and Donald Dossie, a folklore historian, echoed it. It's a dramatic tale.
That sounds very neat. Divine dinner party ruined by number 13.
Hmm.
But is that how the original myth goes?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. If you go back to the Prose Edda, the main source by Snorri Sturluson.
The primary source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story of Loki and Baldur's death, It doesn't actually emphasize 12 gods being there beforehand. It's not explicitly framed as a dinner party, and crucially, the number 13 isn't highlighted as significant in that original narrative.
Huh. So the whole 12 gods plus Loki makes 13 thing is, what? A later addition?
It really seems that way, like a later interpretation, maybe trying to retroactively fit the existing superstition onto the myth, finding a reason for the fear after the fact.
That's fascinating. So these origin stories we often hear might not be the actual origins, but maybe later attempts to explain a feeling that already existed. Okay, what about Friday the 13th then? That connection feels almost automatic now. Surely that has deep roots.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But while the number 13 was building its unlucky reputation, Friday the 13th wasn't seen as particularly bad luck back when the Knights Templar were arrested. That was Friday, October 13th, 1307.
Right, that famous date.
But the link between their arrest and the phobia of Friday the 13th, that's actually much, much more recent. It really only took hold in the 21st century. And a lot of that seems to be down to the Da Vinci Code popularizing the idea.
No kidding. Dan Brown.
Seems like popular culture really cemented that connection, yeah. Not some ancient Templar curse.
Wow. So it really looks like the fear of 13 is more of a slow burn, like a gradual accumulation of negative vibes from different places, rather than one Big Bang event.
I think that's a really good way to put it. A cultural tapestry woven over time, with threads from religion, folklore, maybe even tarot cards and the popular imagination.
Okay, so we've looked at some potential origins and kind of debunked a few popular myths along the way. Now, how does this fear actually, play out? Where do we see Triskaidekaphobia in the real world?
Well, one of the most obvious places is buildings. Architecture.
Right, the missing 13th floor.
Exactly. In many places, especially North America, it's incredibly common for buildings with more than 12 floors to just skip numbering the 13th floor. They go straight from 12 to 14.
It's so common you almost don't notice it, right?
You really don't, but when you stop and think, it's a pretty concrete example of a belief, a superstition, directly influencing practical design.
So why do they do it? Just to avoid freaking out superstitious tenants.
That's definitely a big part of it. Owners and developers don't want issues with people feeling uneasy renting or buying on a 13th floor.
Makes business sense, I guess.
Yeah, but it's probably also influenced by the developers or builders' own feelings in some cases. And interestingly, way back when skyscrapers were new, some architectural critics actually had concerns about buildings going higher than 13 floors for various reasons, not just superstition.
So a mix of psychology, business, and maybe some old architectural anxieties too. Do people get creative with avoiding the number?
Oh, absolutely. You see all sorts of things. 12A is common. Sometimes they use M, the 13th letter.
Puffer.
I even read about one building under construction using a heart symbol for the 13th level.
A heart. That's actually kind of sweet. A nice way to dodge the bad vibes. Any specific examples of buildings doing this?
Sure. The Radisson Hotel in Winnipeg, I believe, calls its 13th floor the pool floor.
Ah, functional renaming.
Right. The Sheraton on the Falls in Niagara Falls uses its 13th floor just for a restaurant. And the Trump Tower in Chicago labels what would be the 13th floor as a mezzanine level, repurposing or renaming the space.
So it's not always just skipping it. Sometimes it's rebranding it, trying to outsmart the bad luck.
Kind of, yeah. Other times, the floor might just be for mechanical stuff, pipes and wires, uninhabited, so nobody has to worry about living or working there.
Like Monroe Park Towers in Richmond. I think they use M on the freight elevator for that floor.
Exactly. And then you get really complex solutions like Princess Towers in Kingston, Ontario. They have split-level apartments, so the physical 13th floor exists inside someone's apartment, but the main elevators don't stop there directly.
That's quite the workaround. It's amazing how many strategies exist just to avoid one number. And it's not just floors, right? Hotels must skip room 13 too.
Very common, yeah. Lots of hotels just omit room number 13 entirely. And it even happens with street addresses. There are several well-known streets in London, for instance, that just don't have a number 13.
Whole street numbers missing. That really shows how pervasive this is. Do we know how common skipping the 13th floor actually is, like percentage-wise?
Well, there was an estimate back in 2002 from Otis Elevators. They reckoned that about 85% of the buildings they worked with that had 13 or more floors didn't label one as the 13th floor.
85%. That's huge. Really highlights the power of this belief.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides to doing this?
There can be, yeah. Like in Vancouver, the city planners actually banned skipping numbers like 13.
Why?
because it can confuse emergency responders, first responders. In a crisis, you need clear sequential numbering, no guesswork.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense from a safety perspective.
Yeah.
You don't want firefighters trying to figure out if M comes after 12.
Exactly. Seconds count.
What about other transport? Does 13 pop up as unlucky there?
It does. A lot of ships, cruise liners especially, will skip the 13th deck, go straight from 12 to 14.
Okay, similar to buildings.
And there's a really striking example from Ireland with car registration plates. For the year 2013, there was a genuine worry that having 13 on the plates would actually discourage people from buying new cars.
Seriously, people wouldn't buy a car because of the year on the plate.
It was a major concern for the motor industry. It shows how deep these beliefs can run, impacting consumer behavior and the economy.
So what did they do?
They got creative. The government worked with the industry and split the year. Cars registered in the first half of 2013 got plates ending in 131, and those in the second half got 132.
131 and 132. That's actually quite clever. A government policy decision based on a superstition.
Pretty much. A practical solution to navigate a widespread belief with real economic implications.
Okay, so we've seen it influence design, economy. Are there any specific big historical events linked to 13 that might have reinforced its unlucky reputation?
There are a few that get mentioned. The British submarine HMS K-13, it sank during trials back in 1917, a real tragedy, many lives lost.
Oh, terrible.
After they salvaged and repaired it, they renamed it HMS K-22. And interestingly, another British sub, L-13, was apparently never even put into service. Coincidences like that, especially tragic ones, can definitely strengthen negative feelings about a number.
Yeah, those are somber examples. Any others that stand out?
Well, the big one is probably Apollo 13.
Ah, yes. Houston, we've had a problem.
Exactly. Launched April 11th, 1970 at 13.13 Central Time. Then the oxygen tank exploded on April 13th.
All those 13s.
Right. Now, despite the massive danger, the crew heroically made it back safely, which is amazing. But the number 13 is undeniably tied to that major near-disaster incident, even with the ultimately positive outcome for the crew.
Apollo 13 is just burned into our memory, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the number 13 is right there in the name, the timing. It's easy to see why people connect it to bad luck.
It really is. And then in the financial world, there was the Friday the 13th mini crash. That was Friday, October 13th, 1989.
Another one?
Yeah. These high-profile events happening on the unlucky day, or involving the unlucky number, they tend to stick in the public mind and just reinforce the superstition.
So some pretty significant events with that number attached. Now, this makes me think about the U.S. Space Shuttle program. I feel like I heard they might have skipped to mission number 13. Is that true?
That's a common idea, yeah, and maybe Apollo 13 feeds into that perception. But the reality is a bit more complicated. Well, STS-41J was actually the 13th space shuttle flight to launch overall, so they didn't completely avoid it, at least not initially.
Okay, so they did fly a 13th mission, just not called STS-13. What happened then?
They did change the numbering system after STS-9, and what would logically have been the next mission, STS-10, got flown, but then the sequence jumped. What would have been STS-13 ended up being designated STS-41C.
41C. That's quite a jump. Was that specifically to avoid 13?
The new system itself was meant to be more informative, using the fiscal year, the launch site code, and then a letter for the sequence within that year. So it was partly bureaucratic restructuring.
Ah, logistics. Not necessarily superstition driving it?
Probably mostly logistics.
Yeah.
But there's a fun little story about the crew of STS-41C, the ones who would have been STS-13.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, they kind of leaned into it. They designed a funny mission patch that included a black cat. And get this, they ended up landing on Friday the 13th. Yeah, and one of the crew members apparently said he thought that was pretty cool. So even at NASA, there's room for a bit of humor about these things.
That's brilliant. Embracing the bad luck. And just to be clear, STS-41C wasn't actually the 13th launch, just the one that would have been numbered 13.
Right. And because launches get delayed and shuffled, the mission originally planned as the 13th might not have launched 13th anyway. NASA's official line back in 2016 was that the numbering change was because they were planning way more launches back then, pre-Challenger, and needed a more complex system.
Makes sense.
Interestingly, the tragic STS-107 mission, Columbia, was the 113th launch, whereas STS-113, which launched earlier, was successful. Shows the numbers don't always dictate destiny.
No, definitely not. So the numbering is more about planning than predicting.
Okay, shifting focus a bit. We know 13 gets a bad rap in many Western cultures, but are there similar number fears elsewhere?
Oh, definitely. A big one is tetraphobia,
Yeah.
the fear of the number 4.
4. Why 4? It's huge in many East Asian cultures, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, because the word for 4 in those languages sounds incredibly similar to the word for death.
Wow, a direct linguistic link to death. That's powerful.
It really is. So just like we might skip floor 13, it's very common there to omit floors with the number 4 in buildings. Elevators might go 1, 2, 3, 5.
Same pattern, different number.
Exactly. You see it in hospitals, apartment buildings, even product numbering. Remember Nokia phones? They largely avoided model numbers starting with 4 for the Asian market.
Huh. I never knew that.
In South Korea, they usually do have a 4th floor, but sometimes in newer buildings, you might see the button labeled F instead of 4. A subtle avoidance.
F for 4, I guess. It's fascinating how language shapes these anxieties. Any other number phobias?
Yep. In Italy, there's heptadecaphobia, fear of 17.
17. Okay, what's the story there?
It comes from Roman numerals. X70. If you rearrange those letters, you can spell Vixel.
Vixel.
In Latin, it means I have lived, which became a sort of euphemism on tombs for I am dead.
Ah, another death connection. Through an anagram this time.
Right. So because of that, some Italian airlines might skip row 17. Some hotels might skip room 17. Even MSC Cruises, an Italian company, doesn't have a deck 17 on their ships.
It's amazing how these specific cultural and historical quirks create these fears.
Isn't it? And there are others too. In parts of Afghanistan, the number 39 is considered unlucky. That's triskaidekaphobia. The reasons aren't as widely documented, but the fear is real there.
39, okay.
And then, of course, you have the phobias linked to the number of the beast from the Book of Revelation. Fear of 666 hexaconta or sometimes 616, depending on the manuscript, hexacosioecatectodecaphobia.
Right, those are more widely known, I suppose.
Yeah.
So a whole world of number fears out there, but
Yeah.
it's not all bad for 13, is it? I feel like I've heard it's lucky sometimes, too.
Absolutely. It's not universally unlucky at all. Before World War I, 13 was actually seen as lucky in France. You'd find it on good luck charms, postcards.
In France.
Yep. And in modern Italy, generally, 13 is considered a lucky number, except maybe for that 13 at the table thing. That old superstition might still hang around a bit.
Okay, so lucky Italy mostly.
And in Cantonese-speaking places like Hong Kong or Macau, the pronunciation of 13 sounds very similar to the words for sure to live or definitely alive.
Oh, wow. The complete opposite of the death association with 4 in other parts of Asia.
Exactly. So there, 13 is quite auspicious. It really shows how much context and culture matter in how we see numbers.
It's incredible. The exact same number, completely opposite meanings depending on where you are.
It is. And even within Western culture, you find pockets where 13 is good luck. Colgate University is a famous example.
Colgate, the university.
Yeah, 13 is their lucky number. The university was founded by 13 men with $13 and 13 prayers. They even celebrate Friday the 13th as Colgate Day, their luckiest day.
That's great. They completely flipped the script on it. What about sports? Plenty of athletes wear number 13, right? And some are pretty successful.
Oh, tons of them. Dan Marino in the NFL, Wilt Chamberlain in the NBA legends, footballers like Eusebio, Gerd Mueller, Michael Ballack, Alessandro Nesta.
All top players.
Right. In Venezuela, apparently 13 is often seen as lucky, so baseball players like Dave Concepcion and Omar Vizquel wore it. Mats Sundin, the hockey player, had his number 13 retired by the Toronto Maple Leafs. Clearly didn't hurt their careers.
No kidding. They definitely weren't worried about bad luck. Anyone else famous? Embrace number 13.
Well, Taylor Swift is probably the most famous current example.
Yes. Taylor Swift and her lucky 13.
She talks about it all the time, writes it on her hand. She's made it a huge part of her public persona, and she's arguably one of the most successful artists on the planet.
She certainly has.
Yeah.
Really shows that the perception of 13 is definitely not universally negative.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How does this fear, triskaidekaphobia, pop up in popular culture? In stories and films? Oh, it's everywhere once you start looking. It's great fodder for fiction. You get those conspiracy theories, right? That the missing 13th floors in government buildings hide secret departments, maybe doing shady stuff.
The secret 13th floor. Classic trope.
Exactly. It's used for suspense and mystery in films like The 13th Floor, Nightmare on the 13th Floor, and Stephen King's story, 1408. The whole thing is about a terrifying hotel room on the technically 13th floor, even though the button says 14.
Right, that taps right into the unease around the number.
It really does. You see it in sci-fi, too. Max Headroom had secret labs. Hitchhiker's Guide had a secret division 13. There was even a computer game called Floor 13.
Huh. Straight to the point.
Shows like Red Dwarf, Babylon 5 had an episode Gray 17 is Missing, playing on the idea. The X-Files, of course. Even Batman comics had a storyline, Night of Owls, featuring sinister goings-on on the 13th floors of Gotham
It's
buildings.
like a shorthand, isn't it? Use the number 13 or missing 13th floor, and it immediately adds a layer of something uncanny or dangerous.
It really is pervasive. You've got the band The 13th Floor Elevators, mentions in books like No Country for Old Men. The kids' show Freaky Stories often used it. It just carries that weight of apprehension in our collective imagination. It's a useful tool for storytellers.
Definitely. So finally, are there any famous people who are known to have actually suffered from triskaidekaphobia themselves, like a genuine phobia?
Yes, there are some well-documented cases. The composer Arnold Schoenberg is a famous one. He was apparently terrified of the number 13. It affected his work, his life. They even say he dreaded his 76th birthday because 7 plus 6 equals 13.
Wow, that's intense.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt was also known to be superstitious about it. He'd apparently avoid traveling or holding important meetings on the 13th.
FDR too. Interesting.
The Yiddish writer Sholem Aleichem is another example, and more recently, author Stephen King has openly talked about his triskaidekaphobia. Nick Yaris, the exoneree, has mentioned it too.
Stephen King, who writes horror, is afraid of 13.
Ironic, isn't it? But it shows it's not just some vague cultural idea. For some people, it's a real impactful phobia.
It's fascinating and, yeah, maybe a little sobering to see how this seemingly irrational fear can affect anyone, even really accomplished, rational thinkers.
It really does highlight that intersection of deep cultural beliefs and individual psychology. They can combine in pretty powerful ways.
So bringing this deep dive to a close, we've kind of traced the threads of triskaidekaphobia. From those murky origins, the tarot links, the Last Supper interpretations, the Norse myths that maybe weren't quite right.
Right, and seeing how it actually impacts the real world. Building designs, street numbering, even those Irish license plates.
Yeah. And we saw how events like Apollo 13, even if the outcome was ultimately okay, can still reinforce the fear. Plus, its role in pop culture and how it affects real people.
Exactly. Pinpointing one single origin might be impossible, but the influence, it's undeniable. It's just such a great example of how history, culture, and psychology all kind of weave together to shape how we see things, how we behave.
So maybe next time you're in an elevator and notice there's no button for 13, you'll think about it a bit differently. Or when you hear about Apollo 13, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other beliefs, things we might think are irrational, are quietly shaping our world, our decisions, the designs around us, even if we don't consciously buy into them? What other numbers or days or symbols carry that kind of hidden cultural weight, and why?
That's a really good question to leave things on. Definitely something to think about.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.